Hello everyone. So I'm Krystal. I'm the NUM of the Inpatient Haematology and Bone Marrow Transplant Unit at the Royal Melbourne, and Vanya is one of the coordinators for the safety program which has been implemented at Melbourne Health quite some time ago. So I'm going to get Vanya to have a chat to you about what the program is, and then I'll have a talk to you about how that's impacted on our unit and the implementation for our chemotherapy.
Thanks, Krystal. Okay, so at Melbourne Health, what we're talking about when we're talking about Melbourne Health, by the way, is about the Royal Melbourne Hospital and also our Northwest Mental Health Service. And I'm going to just kind of give you an overview of what we've done as an organisation-wide program. Our vision at Melbourne Health is to be first in care, research and learning. And we've done a lot of talking over the last few years about the fact that in order to get there, we need to be a great place to work and a great place to be cared for. Now, I think you've talked a lot about, and it's very clear that we know that if we look at our patient experience, that's really highly correlated with good patient outcomes. And likewise, we know that good staff experience, if staff come to work and enjoy coming to work, that is associated with good outcomes as well. There's really clear data to show that. When we're talking about a great place to work, some of the things you've already been talking about, things that means different things to different people. It means perhaps, patient-nurse ratios that might ring into your ears, or things like electronic prescribing. But what I want to flag is that being a great place to work is more than just systems, processes and good infrastructure. We can have all of that. You can have a flash new building with great electronic processes and perfect ratios and still find coming to work painful and not provide good care to patients because of the people aspect. So much of what we do in healthcare comes back to our team, comes back to the relationship we have with our colleagues. And we know that in order for a team to be effective, we need everyone in that team to feel safe and comfortable and able to speak up, to have a voice, to feel that they are able to contribute their ideas, their concerns. I guess we really talk about the fact that we wouldn't want anyone to go home from the Royal Melbourne at the end of the day second-guessing the care that they've provided and wishing that they'd been able to speak up or ask a question. I know from my own clinical work, though, that I have been in situations where I've made decisions or supported colleagues to make decisions or watched colleagues make decisions, sometimes even harder, had questions and concerns about it and not being able to say anything. Not necessarily because I wasn't physically capable of speaking, but often it's around my own confidence or the culture of the team and the ward and not feeling that it's appropriate. One of the questions that popped up in your panel discussion there was, how do we help nurses raise their concerns or build a culture where it's normal to raise concerns, even if the consultant and the patient have a different perspective? And absolutely, that's what this is about. It's around not necessarily that the nurse can raise their concerns and speak up and they're going to have exactly what they expect to happen, but they should be able to have a frank, open discussion and be confident at the end of the day that the care that's being provided is the right care. The other thing I'll flag here is we know from looking at incidents, clinical incidents and RCAs, that the vast majority of the time things go wrong in our patient care, the big contributing factor isn't so much processes, policies, infrastructure. It's 75% of the time communication, something that we can do something about. So in terms of our journey, we started a program targeting culture 2 years ago at the Royal Melbourne, and don't need to go through this in detail, but I guess to say that we started 2 years ago because we heard from our staff that we're not consistently a great place to work. And some of these things might ring true to you. I'm sure we're not the only organisation in the world that hears some of this stuff from our staff, particularly that third point, that our values are a poster on a wall, but not necessarily something that we live and breathe. And that actually the reality of coming to work can sometimes be really challenging. I guess also, don't want to spell out the obvious, but there's been a lot of attention on this out there in the broader community, and we know that this is something we need to take a stand on. So we have implemented a number of different activities looking at culture. We know that this isn't just a quick silver bullet kind of thing. You can't just transform a culture overnight. But we implemented a safety culture program with looking at components including leadership and staff wellbeing, looking at how we change, how we support leaders to do change well. We're still continuing work in that space. But one of the biggest areas for us has been focusing on speaking up. In terms of speaking up, we started off by asking every staff member in the organisation, and that's every staff member, senior consultants, nursing staff, techs, cleaners, food services, finance, everyone in the organisation to take an hour out and attend a workshop where they hear about speaking up for safety. And since we started the program, 84% of our staff have attended. And what we know is that through attending, the feedback we get is incredibly positive. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. We also, at the same time, implemented a safety net program, so a system which we call our WeCare system, that staff can use to raise concerns electronically if they feel they can't speak up, if they're not feeling safe or confident or able to speak up in the moment. And people are using that system increasingly. So what we cover through that 1 hour workshop, we talk about why speaking up's important. We talk about, as it says up there, some of these principles that speaking up is a life skill. Some of us find it easier than others, but it's something that we can all improve with practice, and it's something that we can improve as a team if we all actually talk about it and take some time out to say, yes, we value this, this is what we're committed to. We get staff to practice using a 4-step graded assertiveness model that's based on a system that's being used in other high reliability organisations like aviation. So 4 steps, starting at a simple check, but moving to that step of elevating if we're still concerned. I talk about the fact we've got a responsibility too, that we can't walk past, that if it was my sister, if it was my loved one, I would say something. I'm not going to walk past second best or care that I'm not quite confident about. That we also have a responsibility to listen, and sometimes that's harder. It's all well and good to teach our staff to speak up, but we also need to spend time teaching our staff to be spoken up to and to be appreciative and see that as our team and our colleagues having our back. And we start with that basic assumption of that our colleagues haven't made mistakes on purpose. We're all human, we all make mistakes. So we start by just asking rather than telling them to do things differently. And we're explicit about both our respect for them and our concern for the situation. I'm just going to show a short video now. This is a video from our Chief Executive, Christine, who started midway through this program, and it talks about her commitment to and why this program is important.
Delivering health care is complex and at times challenging, involving multiple health professionals and multiple teams. And so how we work together, how we communicate with each other is fundamental to delivering high quality health care. Safety is paramount to how we work at Melbourne Health. All our staff have the right to feel safe, supported and respected in their workplace. If our staff feel safe, they will deliver safe care.
Arm across that way.
That's it.
That's it. 2, 3. Good.
We want values to be not just something written on a wall, but values that guide how we work together and how we interact with each other and with our patients, consumers and their families. The Speaking Up for Safety program is a wonderful initiative, assisting our staff to feel empowered and giving them the skills to speak up when something is not right. I encourage you to embrace this Melbourne Health initiative, assisting us to change the culture and helping us to achieve our vision of being first in care, research and learning.
So I think having strong leadership support, people like Christine, the executive, the board, really driving this has made this something that we as an organisation are really proud of, and it has started to have an impact. In terms of how we're going, I'm going to be very frank and honest and say we're on a journey, as every health service is. It's not that our culture is now perfect, and it's not that we don't have any medication errors now because someone always speaks up. We're still learning, and we're going to continue to support our staff to put this into practice. But we do know that the vast majority of our staff are supportive, particularly some of our key groups, like our HMO group, who initially told us that they found it really hard to speak up. And we know that, as it says up there, 92% of staff who have attended the workshop tell us afterwards that they're confident to speak up and that they plan to use that graded assertiveness model in practice. Now, we need to do more to support that to actually happen, but it is a step in the right direction, just being conscious of it and just raising the profile. And as you can see, it started to have an impact in terms of staff feeling that, yeah, this is a good place to work. I would recommend it. I'm going to hand over to Krystal, who's going to talk a little bit more specifically now about what this looks like in her ward.
Sorry, I'll just grab the next slide. So why was speaking up for safety quite important for us? When we relocated into our new unit in April 2016, we had a large scale of change across the haematology service. And with this, we have a very fast-paced environment, but we also had a lot of changes in our medical team across the service, and nursing staff didn't have that rapport with the new members of the team and didn't feel comfortable speaking up with them. CHARM was also a new process for us, and that was implemented in 2016 on entering into our new unit. And there was also a lot of increase in our medication errors during the implementation, and that was mainly across the fact that we did go from handwritten prescriptions, and we were used to having our chemotherapy on one chart and then having our medications on the medication chart, and then when we implemented CHARM, it ended up being somewhere in the same place, and so that did result in some errors with staff. Chemotherapy was made across the road at Peter MacCallum's Centre instead of Royal Melbourne, and with that it meant that we were working now across 2 sites, and previously our chemotherapy was made in Royal Melbourne, and so that created a lot of challenges with our transporting and also in the labelling of our medications as well. One of the things that happened not long after that was we had a patient that had some conditioning, and a part of that was some melphalan, which we used to previously give, and we do now in 500 mils to 1 litre over 30 to 60 minutes. And when we actually picked up melphalan on one instance, it came up in 100 mils, which was quite a milky consistency and wasn't really familiar to our senior nursing staff. So they went through a lot of checking processes, they did all the right things, did actually administer it in the 100 mils, and what ended up happening was that the drug actually participated in the line, and it actually meant that the drug had stopped the infusion, and we did need to discard the medication, and unfortunately we did have to have it remade, and the doses that were missed were then had to be reinfused for that patient, and we were very lucky that the patient didn't have any altercations from this, and is actually doing quite well and didn't have any renal failure. But I wonder if the safety code had been included in our checking processes that we currently have within our unit, then maybe the drug wouldn't have been administered and it would have been remade. So we did need a framework that supported staff to escalate their concerns in an appropriate way, that also supported patient safety as well. So what have we done? So all staff attended the Speaking Up for Safety workshop, and that included medical and allied health staff. It was only a 1-hour session. Our staff had a trained Speaking Up for Safety champion who was actually on our ward. The organisation, when they first started the program, only had 12 safety champions, so we're very lucky that one of ours were from our unit, and they did provide a lot of coaching and debriefing to the staff as well. Sessions with examples of nursing teams to practice using the safety code, which we did give examples and allowed them to have opportunities of practicing to speak up in a safe environment. But I think one of the things that was actually really important about this was actually hearing some of their experiences around when they could have used it in the past, when they didn't get opportunities. And some of those things that came up, which you may also be familiar with, is around chemotherapy consent and some of the challenges that we face when giving chemotherapy, and ensuring that the medical staff have had really thorough conversations with patients, making sure that it's really well documented and that they're informed and have written consent prior to chemotherapy being given. And a nurse actually did provide us with an example of where she used the safety code as she felt that some of the steps in this process had actually been missed. Maintaining well-embedded checking processes in chemotherapy management, and I think this is always evolving and you're always needing to double-check this, but I think a part of the safety program was also about it being a checking process, and that a 1-hour session was not enough to help staff to be able to speak up in times where they didn't feel comfortable with what they were doing. And I think it's also about supporting the staff to make sure that they've got the tools that they need and the confidence to be able to speak up at times. So we did do a lot of broader activities that focused on team building and communication amongst the wider team, as well as embedding the safety code as something that we all can use, and examples of that. And I've got an example on the next slide, which is an example which one of the staff members had also shared during one of our sessions. So the safety code is literally CODE, which is check, options, demands and elevates. So in this example that I've got up here, we had a nurse on the unit who was checking chemotherapy protocol against charm and realised that the patient had a decline in their weight and was uncertain if the chemotherapy dosing was correct for this patient in their chemotherapy protocol. So they escalated to the pharmacist, who stated that they had checked it and that it was fine, and the nurse still felt that her concerns had not been heard, and she was also worried that the dosing for the patient was not correct. So therefore the nurse used the check, options and demands and the steps of the safety code and felt that it needed to escalate. So the nurse responded and asked if they would mind checking it with her, and the pharmacist said that she had checked it and that she was busy at the time. The option was that the nurse said that she was unsure if this was the correct dosing for the patient and that the weight did not match the protocol, and would it be possible for them to check it together to ensure that the right administration, the right drug dose was administered to this patient, and the pharmacist stated that the dosing was within the correct range. The nurse then demanded and indicated that she could not give the chemotherapy without ensuring that the dosing was correct for this patient, so that could she please check it with the calculation of the patient's weight to be considered. And then the pharmacist then sat down for 5 minutes and went through the dosing with the correct weight to check that it was within an adequate range and did not require dose reduction. And the elevates is usually if you have an example where the patient, you need to actually stop and allow both people to actually check whether there's something that needs to be considered, but the nurse did not need to escalate any further because the chemotherapy was safely administered. We did have an example last week where we had a BMT patient that came in for their conditioning and all the checking processes and systems were all complete. The patient was documented, consented, documented by the medical team to give the busulfan, was ready for conditioning, and it was just the fact that the nursing staff had noticed on the overnight bloods that there was a low creatinine clearance and the EGFR was only 50. And it was just that one checking nurse and the whole process that actually just said that she wasn't comfortable giving the chemo to this patient until it had been escalated to the consultant, despite medical team saying that it was safe to give him. And it turned out that the dose did need to be withheld, the conditioning did need to be delayed, and the fludarabine doses needed to be dose reduced by 50%. And that was just something that happened last week, but if it hadn't been for that nurse having the confidence to actually check, then that potentially could have been given to that patient. So that was...
Right. Thank you.
all we had.
Is that working? Yes. Vanya, thank you very much. It sounds like an interesting program and certainly resonates with some of Bob's earlier comments about the St Vincent's incidents and the role of culture. So that's great. And we also had another example, I think, that Robin talked about, where the nursing staff also wanted a halt around the access device. We do have a couple of questions from Slido. One being, now you've mentioned a couple of examples. Have you built into the program some way of capturing those examples so that you can actually continue to learn and also monitor, I guess, the impact of the initiative?
So we've got an award nomination as part of one of our reward and recognition, or part of our reward and recognition program called the Good Catch Award. And basically that's where staff can log exactly what it sounds like, a good catch. The vast majority of those good catches are an example of somebody speaking up. So we use that to a lot of those stories as examples and scenarios of people using the safety code or part of it. And the truth is, a lot of the time, this is something that people are doing as part of their day-to-day work. They wouldn't necessarily see it as out of the ordinary. So it's great to be able to celebrate and recognise that they're already living that part of our culture.
There's also a question about, are there any key learnings that you've can bring and share with people about how this could be applied in a smaller health service?
I guess the Royal Melbourne is a very large hospital and a large health service, but the principles of supporting staff to speak up, I think, can apply anywhere. In some ways, I know that similar programs are running in lots of hospitals around Australia, and in some ways it's easier with a smaller group of staff because it's easier to get people into training generally and get together and have those conversations and to talk around what the barriers are and identify and address those in a targeted way. I think the key parts, though, the principles are agreeing to what is it that we want to do? If we're going to support our staff to speak up, what are our principles? What are we agreeing that we all want to be doing on the same page? And I think one of the things that we've learned is that culture is very ward or unit or team specific. It's very different on 7B in Krystal's area to what it might be in ICU or ED. So whatever you do, whatever size your organisation, it's about embedding this at the local team.
Yeah, I think just going back to your first question, I think one of the things, we don't have a huge amount of incidences that we have on our unit. These were just a couple that we did have that we did, all of them are reported through Riskman and are all followed up appropriately, and because of the fact that we are across 2 services now, we have got systems in place with our quality team where we are able to follow those up at both sites, so that's cool.
Right, and one very quick question from Slido. Do you have does your EMR cover medication administration?
Our EMR?
I think
When
they
it
just got money in the
comes.
budget, actually. So I think it's coming.
It's coming. We will have EMR by 2020, so that'll be great.
And I've heard that it does include administration, so that will present even more challenges when it comes to chemotherapy and then medications as well. So.
Great. Well, if there's no other questions, I might get you to thank again Krystal and Vanya.